Good day, Brigade! This is Bobby coming at you with our Season 2 finale, the slightly better season, if I must be perfectly honest. That being said, we're going to actually be, for our third season, be on a little bit of a hiatus at first, but we're actually planning on looking back at some of these first Season 1 episodes and maybe redoing them a little bit because they are definitely a lot more unscripted and a lot more... Oh boy! There's one or two that we're probably not going to change. For example, Ideology of the Month, Geoism, aside from being our most popular episode, is definitely not going to change because that's actually one of the few episodes we put a lot of work into, and quite frankly, we're really proud of that one. Anywho, before we get started with our episode, which is going to be talking about the major minor parties of the American Union, let's explain what that is. So, what we're using for the definition of major minor party for what we're going to discuss, which is these parties' platforms. Man, we got a lot for you. A major minor party in this case is going to be a minor political party or third party, i.e. the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitution Party, you know, what have you, those guys, that have had a significant enough influence on the two major parties and have representation in actual party affiliations in multiple states. So, that would be broken down to the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and the Constitution Party. All three of which have this distinction. And you will find out very soon, based on their platforms, just how much of an influence they have been on both the major political parties. Because, wow! You are going to find some really interesting things here. So, let's get started with it, shall we? So, before we really get started into this, and I know, kind of a bit of a lie, we said we were going to get into it right away, but before we really get started into this, we're going to tell you right now that the music you're listening to was actually written by myself. I'm not the best sound engineer, and I wrote this a few years back, but this is a recording that I did, in fact, write all the parts to and perform myself. Anywho, hope you like it. Let's get started. So, the first party we're going to be addressing here is the party you probably have the most familiarity with. They are the Libertarian Party. They were established in 1970, and honestly, they're really interesting. So, take the economic ideas of the right-wing and Republican parties, the right-wing general current in the Republican Party, mash that up with the social ideas of the Democrats and the more leaning and progressive angle, and that more or less gives you the Libertarian Party. What do we mean by this exactly? Well, obviously, we're going to start out that libertarians want to preserve and defend private property rights, ideally under a Lockean ideal concept. So some of you might be wondering, what we're referencing here is John Locke's idea of property, and that property ownership or private property ownership can apply as long as there is enough and as good of condition of property for everyone to obtain. John Locke wrote this in time when colonialization was well into full swing, so the idea was, well, there must be land everywhere for everyone to have. And of course, everyone in this case just meant Europeans. I mean, that's not fair. That's not entirely accurate, but that is generally the idea behind it. Libertarians obviously want very limited government. Like, the role of government they want is at most an arbitration between two parties, and not political parties, and the only proper role of government is in the economic realm is to protect property rights, educate disputes, and provide a legal framework in which voluntary trade is protected. All the efforts of the government to distribute wealth or to control and manage trade are considered improper in this regard. So, yeah, seems like a basic idea. Government trying to redistribute wealth or manage trade like a deer is seen. Fun word, by the way. Or really just try to interfere with the private economy in any way, shape, or form is not allowed, it's not okay. The libertarians do not want that. I mean, again, this should be pretty straightforward. Additionally, they are also opposed to the idea of aggression. In this case, aggression is defined as the use, trespass against, or invasion of the borders of another person's owned resource, aka property, without the owner's consent or the threat thereof doing so. They do in fact oppose all acts of aggression as illegitimate and unjust, whether committed by private actors or the state. So that sounds great, doesn't it? There's an interesting part to this too. So just like all that is allowed, and remember how we said that the role of government is properly to educate and arbitrate and all that? So you might be wondering, alright, so what happens if someone does commit an act of, quote, aggression under the definition of the Libertarian Party? Well, some fascinating things actually. Because the state does have the right to find a way to remedy that, which would involve potentially taking that person's property. So, is this considered an aggression by the state? Arguably, yes, but as the Libertarian Party would see it, no, because in their idea, this is acting as that arbitrator or that arbiter to work between the two parties. And thus, this is meant to rectify a situation. Again, you could actually go into debate as to whether or not this counts as state aggression, especially under their own definition. And, well, what I've presented is probably the basic idea of what they would outline. I'm still not personally convinced. Because, why is the state allowed to do that? So, you might be wondering, okay, so there's a lot of ownership in private property and all that. What about individual people? Well, here's where it gets fun. All individuals are presumed to own themselves, aka self-ownership. This can only be forfeited by a result of consequence of an act of aggression by the individual. So, you might be wondering, wait a minute, did that literally just say that you have the right to own yourself, but can forfeit it as a result of a consequence of an act of aggression? Which, if we go back to the definition of aggression under the Libertarian Party, is the use, trespass against, or invasion of the borders of another person's owned resource, aka property, without the owner's consent or the threat thereof. So, you have the right to your own ownership until you do something along those lines, then fuck you, you're not allowed to own yourself. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So you might be wondering, okay, how do property rights come about in this case? What is it to have a Lockean ideal for private property rights? Well, not all of this is Lockean, but we're going to tell you which one is. But there's property rights by three ways. There's original appropriation by becoming the owner by first use and transformation. This is actually considered a part of the Lockean theory of the labor theory of ownership, in which if one were to put forth their own labor into any particular resource or object or property, then that were to become theirs by right of appropriation. Now, here's an interesting little argument to that one, and personally one I find absolutely hilarious, is if one were to take a can of tomato soup, pour it into the ocean, and assuming that the soup's distributed evenly, would the ocean therefore legally become theirs? After all, they did put in the work to put the can of tomato soup into the ocean, and while they may not have necessarily gotten it to mix in 100% evenly on their own, there's still the labor of putting the soup into the ocean. Not only that, but you're actually contributing a resource of your own into the actual thing, and thus, by appropriation, debatably, you do. But many would argue that no, you've just foolishly wasted your can of tomato soup because the ocean is the common ownership of all. But then again, wouldn't that apply to all land? Why does it only apply to water or very specific special circumstances? Shouldn't it apply to everything that could potentially be owned? So the second idea is contract. This one is pretty much self-explanatory, and the idea is that these contracts are supposed to be consensual. The idea is the social contract proposed by John Locke, in which people exchange such items in order to gain other things as a transaction of some sort. The third way is property rights and certain resources are transferred to the victim of the owner's tort, trespass, or aggression to compensate the victim. And this is where it gets into a question of, is this acting as a proper arbiter, or is this the state using aggression to deliver punishment? And if all forms of aggression are illegitimate and unjust, why is this not? So, kind of a problem. They are very much anti-tax, want to repeal things like income tax, obviously. Again, right-wing libertarians or Libertarian Party in the United States, aka proprietarian, this would make sense. They favor a balanced budget amendment, which is actually a really interesting idea that's been floating around in the American Union for decades now, and has actually enjoyed a very wide popular support. So for those of you who are uncertain, a balanced budget amendment would basically be an amendment to the United States Constitution that would require Congress to every fiscal year, provide a balanced budget in which all tax dollars are used and utilized properly, but without going over the set budget limit, and anything that remains after going through the set budget limit and you may have landed under, say like the budget limit was $10 million and you managed to get away with spending only $9.5 million. That other 0.5 would go back to the taxpayers as a reimbursement or rebate. Why? Because it belongs to them in the first place, and the balanced budget amendment requires that we balance it out to zero. That's basically what a balanced budget amendment would be. It was popularized by the Reform Party of the United States in the 90s, but it's had grounding desires since as pretty much back as far as the country's history. Like, the balanced budget amendment has been an idea that's been around for a very, very long time. So much so that Andrew Jackson himself went as far as to end the U.S. national debt by paying it all off. Because this guy was obsessed with a balanced budget. As among other things, like forced deportation. Yeah, Andrew Jackson, the guy who demanded a balanced budget and the Seminoles forced out of Florida. If you haven't gotten it, that latter is not something to be praised. So, the other 4 major planks we're going to cover is your Declaration on Environment. The means and methods of dealing with environmental issues and climate change will come about as a natural consequence of the nature of a free market, and gov regulation is an unnecessary barrier. So basically, they're not in favor of government regulation in order to help with the environment. They believe the free market will in itself work out a solution, which I can see the line of thinking there, but there are a lot of critical problems, and I think you can all figure them out pretty quickly. Or if you're on the other side, well, I'm sure you can find an argument to all those problems possibly pretty quickly. Again, we're not really here right now to make a whole big debate, though we have made our point very clear that we aren't exactly fans of the Libertarian Party. Now keep this in mind. We have voted for Libertarian Party candidates before, and as far as the right-wing political faction goes, we much prefer them right now over the Republican Party. So, keep in mind, it's not a total hatred. It's rather a criticism of, hold on, does this make sense? Further, they are opposed to all government control and regulation of energy. Okay, private energy services, that's a way to go. I don't like it, but that's a way to go. Personally, I'm a fan of municipalization, but hey, everyone to their own, right? They also believe that all public services should be funded or provided in a voluntary manner. Yeah. yeah, that's what people do is, yeah. If you haven't gotten it by now, we definitely don't believe that that would work in reality. And lastly, for the platform that we've picked from their incredibly long documents, we did read through these documents as a disclaimer. It's just we picked out the points that we felt were most relevant or, quite frankly, not well enough known that really should probably be brought more into light. Simply because they're either a fascinating or, in later cases, you'll find quite appalling idea. And here's the last one that might really throw you through a loop. The Libertarian Party is opposed to closed and limited borders and seeks a foreign policy bordering close on to true neutrality. Now, that's not to say they don't believe there shouldn't be an army. In fact, they do believe there should be an army, but strictly for defense and strictly for when it's needed. So, they would definitely go for the military budget and slash that hardcore. Which, cool! Because the American Union spends a fuck ton on its military budget. And quite frankly, right now, that's a little bit much. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that it's going towards things like helping Ukrainians because they definitely need the help. And when we got our own thoughts on that war, it sounds like Russia's actually about ready to give up. Which, awesome. But on that front, we kind of have some agreement on that. So, that was the Libertarian Party. Fascinating group of people. They definitely think out their ideas. Two notable celebrities you might know from the Libertarian Party and are members of the Cato Institute are Penn Jillette and Teller. Yes, the magic comedy duo Penn and Teller are both libertarians and members of the Cato Institute. And they're not just honorary members, they're actual serious members. They know their shit. So, who are we going to pick next? The Green Party. So, the Green Party in its basic sense is, well, a green party. They're a party that favors environmental regulation and change and progressive policies that help promote social justice. Green parties themselves did start out as environmental groups and things like that. I believe the actual Green Party in the United States didn't get national recognition until, I believe, around 2001. I might be wrong on that. Let me double check here. Going through the notes. Going through the notes. Going through the notes. Yeah, it was actually founded in April 2001, 21 years ago. And that is the national platform of the Green Party. They are affiliated with the international group, the Global Greens. We will talk international groups next season because they are a spicy, fun hotcake in themselves. Yep, go ahead and use that phrase, spicy, fun hotcake. We're keeping with it. So, what is the platform of the Libertarians? Well, here are their views on democracy. The Libertarian parties believe that there should be proportional representation in the United States. Cool. And a ranked choice voting system. So you can start to see where the more progressive ideas of the Democratic Party are coming from. Very easily. They also believe that the voting machines that are used in elections, which, oh my god, have we had a fun little headache with that, should be publicly owned open source. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Kind of makes you wonder about a few things, though. Now, open source things are basically things that are freely available, like the ideas, like the coding and all that, and basic idea of how it works and all that is freely available to anyone who wants to learn how to code such a thing. This can be used for all sorts of varieties of things, but the idea generally is that open source is to work as a counter to copyright at least in the realm of coding and such, so that it's not a big barrier of entry into actually learning how to do these things, because if it were, my God, the world would be technologically deprived as hell. They also favor abolishing the Electoral College, which, again, awesome! Just, wow! Like, the Greens, if they actually listen to our podcast, would probably be at least somewhat fans, which, awesome. We agree with you guys on this front. So, what are some of their other ideas? Well, they do believe in the formation of an alternative community service as an option instead of military service for people who leave high school but don't necessarily want to go to college. That would primarily focus on things like environmental education, habitat restoration, water cleanup, and that kind of thing. Which, again, that is a really interesting and neat idea. Let's take a look at that one and explore it more sometime. In fact, if we can, let's maybe get that out on the table. Because that's a pretty good alternative. It's essentially a swords to plowshares idea. Instead of having to fight and such, you could have the option of wanting to help out your community, the nation, and the environment. Awesome! They are vehemently opposed to Citizens United and the idea of money being speech. And in further extension, they are straight up opposed to the idea of corporations being considered people. Which, this is where things get a bit confusing. So, opposed to Citizens United, which basically allowed for the building and formation of super PACs, and for dark money to fund into politics. Yes, let's oppose the crap out of that. That is garbage. It needs to be burned in a fiery hellscape. If you want to know, one of the major notable people who helped push it through, and it is considered a part of his legacy, is Addison Mitch McConnell. So keep that in mind. He's the guy who says dark money is totally cool. And as a result, Citizens United has effectively made money a form of speech. Because, well, if you want to buy some ad space, you better be freaking rich. And the only way you're going to be freaking rich is if you can either collect donations from a ton of people, collect donations from people who have a ton of money but don't necessarily want to be known that they're donating and contributing to said organizations, or you've got some other things going on. So, got some ideas there. That's good. However, there is something we do have to note, and this is kind of an issue. Corporations not being seen as people. This is both good and bad. On the one hand, the good is it wouldn't extend rights of individual liberties and such to corporations, which could then use them in turn to oppress and abuse people. On the other hand, it would limit their ability to be held legally accountable when they did do shit wrong. And you might be wondering, well, couldn't you still sue the corporation? And the answer is, could you? Because a corporation, by its very definition, isn't an individual or even an individual entity. It is a body of organizations or a body of people or a body of entities that works together. This is actually why corporation is the word corporation. The corp comes from the root corpus, which means body. And by this definition, there are a lot of things that do qualify as corporations that we actually kind of favor. For example, trade cooperatives. They're a type of corporation. They're known as a B corporation. They are a body of people who work together towards a common goal. So, are we going to be limiting the interests of all corporations, or just the privately held and joint stock corporations, which limit the number of holders and limit the number of people? In addition to this, if you can't hold the corporation accountable, since it's legally not an entity that can be held accountable, who do you hold accountable then? Do you hold accountable the CEO, who may or may not have had any involvement? Do you hold accountable the board of trustees? Do you hold accountable the shareholders? Who do you hold accountable? In terms of accountability, a corporation kinda needs some form of personhood or entity. Otherwise, it becomes a huge ruddy mess, and quite frankly, how the fuck do you do anything about it? Now, there could be solutions posed, and I've already even thought of a couple as I even went over this in my head, but the idea is corporations aren't people, but corporations are bodies. And bodies should still be held accountable in this case. So, moving on to the next platform idea. They believe Election Day should be a national holiday and that DC does need statehood. It deserves it, it has the right to it, it should be given statehood and freed from direct congressional control in the way that it is. So, for those of you who are not familiar, yes, in theory, DC can make its own laws. In practice, however, literally all these laws can be overridden and told no by Congress. So, in effect, while DC has its own little independent body and governing system, this is entirely answerable to Congress, and at any time, Congress can tell them to fuck off. Another platform bit. They demand the repeal, not the amendment, of the authorization for use of military force. We're going to read this one verbatim from them because it's a lot. The authorization for use of military force was passed by Congress in response to the attacks of September 11, 2001. This is also commonly referred to as the idea of the War Powers Clause, in which technically a president sitting does have the ability to not declare war necessarily, but declare a security or peacekeeping action, which, for all intents and purposes, is war, but it is limited in scope in how it can be used. Asterisk. Now you might be wondering what that asterisk is for. So, normally, when conducting one of these actions, the president has approximately 90 days to show up or shut up and put the troops back. So, what do you think? Towards the end of this 90 days, if the president plays it right, they can either show that there is possible evidence, or at least fabricate enough evidence to suggest that A, this should be allowed to continue their authorization, or B, they might schmooze up to enough congressional seats to say, hey, why don't we let the president keep going on this for a little while? This is problematic because it actually does arguably violate the Constitution, in that Congress is vested with the power to declare war. So, if these aren't wars, then what are they? You might be wondering, well, when was the last time Congress declared war? And, oh boy. Do you really want to know the answer to that question? Because you might not like it. If our research is correct, then the last time Congress formally declared war was World War II. Which means every war that the United States has been in from that point onward, after World War II onward, which would mean starting with like Korea, those weren't technically wars under the definition of the United States Constitution. They were governmental actions. The War Powers Clause exists because the president is the commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, so they should have the authority to use them as they will. The problem is, this became a big, thorny, contentious issue, especially going through the decades up into the 2000s. The issue hadn't really been dealt with, though, because there wasn't any particular reason to do so, and at the time, more people were focused on fighting the threat of communism, as opposed to, actually using their fucking brains. So, it was around 2001 that people were like, hey, we can't just go do war and shit. So, Congress, in response to this sudden attack, decided, our president needs more power to be able to unilaterally go to war and such. And that's where shit got really fucked up. But in doing so, Congress abdicated its exclusive authority. We're going back to the actual declaration within their platform, by the way, just so you know. This isn't our words in this case. Congress abdicated its exclusive authority under the Constitution to declare war. It further violated the Constitution and betrayed its responsibility to the American people by delegating to the president, one person, virtually dictatorial power to commit acts of war whenever he or she chooses. Thus, quote, system of checks and balances has been replaced by Congress just signing the checks to pay for war. The AUMF has been used to justify U.S. military actions in Afghanistan, Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Georgia, Iraq, Kenya, Libya, Pakistan, Philippines, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, and to mention that there are probably others that we don't even know about. Holy shit, now numerous studies have shown that the war on terror has created an ever-increasing number of terrorists, destabilized the Middle East and beyond, and created massive death and destruction so that it serves to maintain the U.S. in a state of perpetual war, which is arguably accurate. And yes, I did kind of just sing through that last little bit because the list just compelled me, you know? But more or less everything just stated there is actually accurate. Congress did hand over their power, and that power has been used to abuse that authority to go commit military actions in a variety of places with the authorization of just one person. Which has kind of created a very worrisome state of affairs, now hasn't it? So, what's their trade policy like? Well, next question is, how much time you got? Because it is a doozy. Here we go. Like, in our notes, we actually said, just look it up and just state it because of how complex it is. So we're actually heading towards that right now. Foreign policy, defense budget. Here we go. So, here it is under their foreign policy-trade, word for word. We urge our government to do the following. A. Reformulate all international trade relations and commerce as currently upheld by the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which has actually been replaced now, which I'm sure they're also opposed to that one too, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, to protect the labor, human rights, economy, environment, and domestic industry of partner and recipient nations so that the growth of local industry and agriculture has the advantage over foreign corporate domination. The U.S. government should call for replacing the WTO, IMF, and World Bank with new institutions that are democratic, transparent, and accountable to the citizens of all nations. Sounds great. And yeah, good luck with that one. That is definitely under the pipe dream category. Not saying it's a bad idea. In fact, love it. Just saying it's incredibly unrealistic. And this is coming from the guy who spends almost every episode promoting the hell out of the idea of the land value tax. You should like it. B. While the IMF and World Bank still exist in their current forms, restructure the rules of performance of the IMF-WB to end the debts of recipient nations, prohibit the use of IMF-WB loans to impose structural adjustment programs that emphasize debt service and export-led development at the expense of social needs, and to install strict standards in the IMF-WB that control the use of grants or loans to prevent fraud, misuse, or subversion of funds by recipient governments. Again, we entirely agree with this, and yeah, the IMF and World Bank do in fact use debts of recipient nations in order to impose structural adjustments, and typically towards more libertarian-style economies. Ones that'll favor corporate interests and business interests and those of the upper classes over that of the common laborer. That is actually real. And it's part of the reason why there are some nations that don't recognize the IMF and World Bank. Is that right there, actually. C. Rewrite the rules for investment of corporate capital in projects operated under the IMF WB to guarantee the rights of citizens of the nations receiving the investment and their right to public ownership and control of their own resources. Did the Green Party just suggest socialism? Yes, they did. They suggested the IMF and World Bank should guarantee the rights of the citizens of nations receiving the investment, their right to public ownership. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they just, whether they know it or not, advocated for socialism at very least. Which, okay, are you the Green Party or the Christmas Party now? Because if you're a Green Party, that's fine. If you want to be a Socialist Party, that's fine. In fact, we could probably use more of a labor movement in the American Union. Correction, we definitely could use more of a labor movement in the American Union. But, I'm not entirely sure you're actually aware of what you just advocated for there. D. Mandate and protect labor's right to organize, create unions, and negotiate with management in all countries receiving U.S. investment and require U.S. corporations that operate in other countries to adhere to the core labor standards established by the International Labor Organization, Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. No, they knowingly advocated for socialism. They definitely did. Again, this is why at this point, and at least in games we play where there are actual multiple political parties you can put in, at least for the United States, when we play these kinds of games, we'll always change the name of the Green Party to the New Progressive Party. Because, while they do definitely put forth in green politics, they've definitely shown much more of an interest in progressive policies as of late than strictly green policies. And again, we're not saying that's a bad idea. In fact, based on what we've read and researched, the Green Party would at least be a good temporary fit for us. We prefer to make our own party and organization because we have our own way and desires of running things that would also help push forth our own ideas. But if we were looking for an alliance, the Green Party wouldn't be a bad choice at all. E. Legislate and enable oversight by an independent agency or a labor union to verify that foreign workers' rights are protected. F. At home, secure the rights of our states to establish stricter standards for health, safety, and for the environment of those of our national government, and to protect themselves against substandard imported goods. Okay. So, little thing here. Just because you produce it at home doesn't mean you're producing something superior. And just because it was produced by a foreign nation does not mean it's inherently inferior. This is why you've got to look at products, determine which one's probably the best fit for what you need, and never hate on trade because trade's the reason why you have options. G. Secure the right of states and municipalities to refuse to invest in foreign businesses that do not abide by their standards for imported goods, fair trade, and environmental protection. It's not a bad idea in spirit. It definitely plays more into the idea of states' rights, but I think that's arguably a violation of the Constitution, mostly under the Commerce Clause, and the fact that interstate and all that kind of commerce and the national trade and all that is controlled by our buddies called Congress. So, I get where you're going in spirit. And in principle, I wouldn't be interested in stopping you. In fact, our own personal beliefs suggest that if there are nation states that are not playing by the rules we've laid out in our freed trade idea, we'll explore that one later too, then yeah, we shouldn't be dealing with them. If they don't hold the same standards, definitely don't deal with them. But legally speaking, that's a freaking nightmare for states and municipalities. H. Prohibit U.S. corporations from avoiding or evading payment of their taxes by banking abroad or locating their charters offshore. Every day, over $1 trillion circles the globe in currency trade, wreaking havoc on low economy nations without obligation to sustainable investment. We seek to restrict the unfettered flow of capital and currency trade and levy the Tobin tax of 0.05% on cross-border currency transactions. Whew! They even have more of an explanation in section E.2, Fair Taxation, in chapter 4. We're not going to go that far because we're just going to read the trade policy for now, but if you are in fact interested, do go to the Green Party website. They have all this stuff freely available, and honestly, all the political parties we'll be discussing have all this stuff freely available. Just look it up if you want the additional information that we do not necessarily provide, because there are provisions that we do not cover of their platform. Now, we tried to get about 10 of the biggest and most interesting issues we could find, but yeah, there are other bits out there, and you definitely should read into these groups. J. We support the funding and expansion of non-governmental organizations and their missions to educate and train people of less developed nations in initiating local business and economic development, and in providing healthcare and family planning. Like it. Keep in mind, though, not all NGOs are necessarily out there to help people. Some of them are out there to exploit people for a profit, too. So you definitely want to be scrutinizing your NGOs. K. Under the agency of the United Nations, we demand that our government renew and initiate government funding and support for family planning, contraception, and abortion in all countries that request it. I like the idea, but... Okay, yeah. The request it part is very important to this, because if they didn't request it, then that would definitely be a hold up there. But, no, it's definitely a request. And for a fun little tack on, we reject the U.S. government's economic blockade of Cuba. We ask the U.S. Congress to lift the embargo and restore normal diplomatic relations in respect for national sovereignty, and demand that the U.S. government end its veto of UN resolutions pertaining to Cuba. We are most definitely in favor of this. A, Cuba's not really a threat. B, we're really not doing anything with this embargo. C, we're making it harder to build friendlier relations with a country that might be able to be pushed out of a socialist ideal if that's what the American Union wants to go for. Because it wouldn't be impossible. You just have to work it right. But D, first and foremost, is we oppose fucking shit like that of any kind. Fuck your embargoes. Fuck your restricted trade. Let the spice flow. And the last tenet of the basic platform of the Green Party. The demilitarization of space and the promotion of peaceful automated space exploration. In other words, basically using the AI over humans, which would be safer and cheaper. Which, that's a good idea for a start. But once you find habitable planets, you're going to have to do manned missions inevitably. If you want to, colonize. But 100% agree. Space should be demilitarized. And this isn't just a matter of, someone built Space Force, so now space is militarized. No. Militarization of space has been around ever since space exploration has been a thing. In fact, Ronald Reagan had a good 11 tries at pushing for what is known as the Star Wars Initiative, or more commonly, the Strategic Defense Initiative. It took on a ton of forms, and oh my god, reading all the iterations of the Strategic Defense Initiative is fucking amazing. Do you know at one point there was a plan to put 7,000 missile capsules in low orbit that all had their own little individual motors and engines that could push them towards a nuclear missile should it come within the range of these little, quote, brilliant pebbles? Yeah. Imagine that. Imagine if the United States just decided, hey, we're going to put 7,000 missile capsules in low orbit across the planet. But don't worry, it's only for nukes. Aside from being a huge pain in the ass in terms of dealing with space exploration, I'm pretty sure the rest of the world would be pretty damn concerned. Not only that, but there are actual real issues with militarization of space, like using satellites to jam communications or inhibit outlook or gather intel in areas they ordinarily wouldn't be able to. And the hypothetical, dropping missiles from satellites. Which is allowed, by the way. Why has no one done it? Because, holy fuck, that would be nightmarish. That's like a fucking sword of Damocles scary, man. Sorry, I don't think that's actually the right tale. I may have misquoted here. Oh, no, we were right. It is Damocles. Awesome. But yeah, that's the basic idea of the Green Party. And honestly, it's one of those things we gotta consider. It's like, not necessarily join them, but work with them wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But again, that's our own personal view. If you see some interesting ideas that you want to go for them. Especially with the Libertarian Party. And now we will get to the last one. And honestly, this one's gonna... Oh, buddy. This is gonna be a minute. And I'm saying this is gonna be a minute because... Whoo-wee! This was a nightmare to read. Not just in a matter of what they were talking about, in a matter of disagreement, but also in a matter of formatting. They had freaking highlights that went through halfway of the next word. Like, seriously. In terms of writing and formatting of the resolutions and platform, the Constitution Party is by far, hands down, without question, the worst. Like, seriously, figure your shit out. Not only that, but they use the word whereas to start literally every paragraph except for the last one and every single resolution they have. And do you know why it's not the last one? Because the last one is therefore. Now, it's interesting that they do this because personally, I find this coming off as incredibly annoying and pretentious, not that they're appealing to an old tradition or anything, which is ironic given that they're a very quote-unquote populist group. And you'll find out what we mean by that in just a minute here. Seriously, we're going to give you an example of just how fucking ridiculous this is to read. We will pick, let's see, any resolution here does not matter. Because, again, we are not exaggerating when we say they use the word whereas like fucking everywhere. Seriously. It is ridiculous. So we'll start with their opposition to the idea of the Strong Cities Network. Oh my God. Just gotta pull it up here real quick. It's also a pain in the ass to read on their website because everything is the same color. Here we go. And we're going to read this in a really ridiculous comedic Southern accent because there's no way we're going to get through this otherwise. Whereas the Strong Cities Network is not a government body at all, but rather a non-governmental organization with no connection to any government or even the United Nations, and whereas the Strong Cities Network is run by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a London-based, quote, think and do tank with long-standing track record of working to prevent violent extremism across all forms. That is to say, the SCN is a front group for the ISD, which is yet another NGO run by a 14-member board of trustees, all of whom... We did that because they highlighted all of who, but not the M of whom. Are directly connected to the global oligarchy, and whereas the SCN is, in fact, the UN plan for global police, using the Department of Justice to enable the Obama administration, in conjunction with the UN, to override American law without congressional input, and Whereas the SCN provides a global platform to support local authorities to systemically share lessons learned, pool resources, and build a community that can mobilize a local action on a global scale. And whereas on September 30th, 2015, at the UN, Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced a new worldwide law enforcement initiative, the SCN, to be set up in certain American cities. And whereas, Jesus fucking Christ, the Strong Cities Network is worried about violence from the extreme right and broader trends of Islamophobia and anti-immigration sentiment, and the SCN is a subterfuge masquerading as the first global network of cities and other subnational entities working together to build social cohesion and resilience to prevent violent extremism in all its forms. And the SCN is focused on, quote, helping policymakers to develop effective responses to these violent and non-violent movements, quote. And whereas, God damn it, stop saying that! In America, such, quote, extreme right groups are already defined by the FBI and Department of Homeland Security as Tea Party groups, Oath Keepers, Constitutionalists, Defenders of the Second Amendment, and all who oppose Islam, the United Nations Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, Common Core education standards, etc. Therefore, be it resolved by the body of the Constitution Party assembled on this date, December 9, 2016, in Huntsville, Alabama, to... Why in the fuck there's a colon here? I don't fucking know. Strongly oppose the Strong Cities Network, the ISD, and any attempt to inflict UN policing on our cities via any elected official. Fuck! And they are all like that. They're also opposed to globalization in general. Keep that in mind. I think that was abundantly clear from their very conspiracy-laden ideas here. By the way, we went to the Strong Cities Initiative website just to figure out what the hell these guys were talking about. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're not technically wrong in that it's a non-governmental organization, and they're not wrong that it is run by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. They are wrong in thinking that there's A, a global oligarchy, B, a global policing effort, C, the desire to stomp out specifically right-wing groups of all stripes, D, oh my god, D, and this is probably the worst, apparently neglecting the fact that Interpol exists. Because, yeah, people wanting to be aware and alert when rises of right-wing extremism, which have been very prevalent lately, and dealing with terrorist groups like the Oath Keepers, which, by the way, their leader was actually just sentenced, well, not sentenced, but found guilty of seditious conspiracy. So, are they an extremist group? Hell yes! And do you really want those fucking crazy sons of bitches running around? I don't. I don't want people thinking they're, quote, defending my freedom by shooting me in the fucking face. That's ridiculous. And that was just the first point. So you can tell how much of a mindfuck this one is. Anywho, in the interest of trying to maintain some degree of fairness, my God, I'm trying to not go after them on this, but you're going to find out very quickly how much I want to punch these guys in the face, and you really should too. Their second point. They encourage the spreading of an article entitled, "Can the County Sheriff Save Our Constitution?" from The New American. The New American is a right-wing magazine owned by the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society being a right-wing think tank that is more than okay because, well, they're on our side. Because they're not a think and do tank. They're just a good old bores. Anyways, they want to distribute this to all county sheriffs in the American Union. And if you're wondering what this article is covering, it covers the story of a sheriff that filed a lawsuit against upholding a provision within the Brady Bill, mandating that state and local law enforcement perform background checks. If you don't know what the Brady Bill is, the Brady Bill was a law signed into law by President Ronald Reagan to require background checks and basic goddamn investigation as to whether or not the person should be allowed to own a gun. Ronald Reagan signing this in part because because a man named John Hinckley attempted to assassinate him in order to impress a woman named Jodie Foster. But yeah, it totally doesn't need to happen. We just nearly lost Ronald Reagan. It's okay. He's on your side, you dumbasses! And look, I'm not a fan of Reagan. Not even close. But Jesus fucking Christ! Can you at least acknowledge that he did something that made sense? Like signing the Brady Bill? I also may be incorrect on who did the Brady Bill here. I'm going to double check that because, again, we don't want to be spreading crazy ass stupid shit. That's what these guys are for. The thing that we described, though, is very true. The way we described, that is more or less what is true. It has mandated federal background checks on firearm purchasers in the United States. This does not apply to gun shows, though. At least didn't. I don't know if it does now. Yep, that is my apologies. It was not under Reagan. It was rejected under Reagan by Congress. However, it was in law by 1993. And therefore, it was President Bill Clinton who signed it into law. Our apologies, it was not President Reagan, but regardless, no matter whose president it is, there is a very legitimate reason to have the Brady Bill. And nowadays, I'd be wondering if you'd be okay with all these random mass shooters being able to have access to firearms without having to go through a background check. And I would rather the state and local law enforcement do it, because they're probably the ones who'd be most effective at it. So kind of makes sense. Next god-awful back-alley abortion of an idea. They favor an American withdrawal from NATO, seeing it as involving the American Union in conflicts not in its national interest. Seemingly forgetting that the United States was the one who founded NATO, and the reason for founding NATO was to, defend and fight in conflicts that were to protect, quote, the national interest. Actually, that's not a quote. Do not quote that. But that is the basic idea to why NATO was around. And subtly to stop the spread of global communism, but they couldn't explicitly say that. It's a whole thing. In fact, at one point, the Soviet Union tried to join NATO just to prove a point. It's a fun story. Look that up. Next point. Stripping the DEA of power and limiting its activities, giving such power to state and local authorities, and possibly ending the war on drugs. At least in name. Conceptually, it appears that, at least under their own beliefs, the enforcement of laws pertaining to drug abuse and such would be sent down the line to local and state authorities. And, again, we're going to have to read this one just to show you how fucking weird it is. Because, wow, some crazy shit here. And, again, we're going to be doing the Southern Voice. This was done at the Constitution Party National Committee meeting of October 2001 in Bloomington, Minnesota. Whereas throughout recorded history, most men have lived under conditions of slavery and despotism imposed by governments under pharaohs, kings, czars, Führers, commissars, dictatorships, democracies. Wait, what? Democracies? I mean, yes, historically you're not wrong, but is this a literal attack against modern democracy? Holy shit. And whereas that greatest threat to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is tyrannical and abusive government, it couldn't be a variety of other things like you assholes. And whereas the republic established by the written United States Constitution was designed with checks and balances and separations of powers to protect the people against the natural tendency of all government to become abusive and tyrannical, and, Jesus fucking Christ, Whereas Congress has authorized and allowed the bureaucratic Drug Enforcement Agency to manifest many abuses of power, including the combination of executive, judicial, and legislative powers in the hands of arbitrary, capricious, and unelected bureaucrats. The arbitrary confiscation of property without due process of law. Damn right, give me my drugs back. And 3, the violation of rights of the people enumerated in the Bill of Rights, including the right to keep and bear arms. Of course, they don't tell you the rest of that constitutional amendment. To be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Again, not telling you the entirety of that constitutional amendment. The right to a speedy and public trial. The right to face one's accusers. That's actually not how it's worded, fun fact. The protection of common law. No, they don't really go into detail about what the fuck that means either. No excessive bail or fines imposed. I'm guessing they're referencing mandatory minimum sentencing, which it doesn't necessarily pose excessive bails or fines, unless you want to be of the argument that there should be no fucking jail time or anything like this, and really it's more of an issue that shouldn't be in the law in the first place. And we'll give it to you on that ground. No cruel or unusual punishments inflicted. What, is the DEA gonna make you smoke a whole carton of cigarettes? Federal intrusion and usurpation of law enforcement authority properly belonging to the state and local government. Whereas the federal courts of our nation are now overloaded, bogged down, and hamstrung by drug cases, of which carry mandatory sentences, thus preventing the courts from conducting their proper business to mete out justice for the people in an expeditious manner. Many would argue that mandatory minimums would actually make that faster. The issue is the fact that you're just throwing in a bunch of people who are otherwise innocent and have only committed the crime of buying and using drugs. But we're going to ignore that fact for a minute and just assume that it's mandatory minimum sentences, because fuck reason. Whereas prisons and jails are now overloaded and overpopulated, thus increasing the tax burden on the honest, law-abiding citizens. And okay, sorry about that. We were unaware that we had a time limit on sections we could make, and apparently that one ran its limit. We were stopped in the middle of the paragraph, and oh my god. Again. Anyways, continue from where we were. Increasing the tax burden on honest, law-abiding citizens, and increasing criminal activities in and out of prison, including riots and disruption within prison walls. And whereas drug abuse is in and of itself a plague that ravages the nation, and whereas criminalization of drug abuse at the federal level of government has not resolved the problem, but has complicated and increased the drug problem. And whereas, particularly, the unconstitutional federal domestic war on drugs is never an ending financial drain on the honest, law-abiding taxpayers, and whereas the threat of tyrannical government in the name of the, quote, drug war, it's in all caps, so I'm going to do that, is destroying the liberty of the people and constitutes a clear and present danger. Therefore, resolved, we call upon Congress to publicly investigate the manner in which all funds and authority granted by Congress into the DEA and other agencies involved in the so-called war on drugs are used, and to terminate authority and funding of any and all unconstitutional activities, and resolve that the Constitution Party call upon God and the moral leadership of our nation to lead our people back to self-government and moral strengths and away from tyrannical government and moral practices that enslave and destroy people. Yeah, so do you or do you not want to end the war on drugs? Do you or do you not want drugs to be legal or illegal? What the fuck are you talking about? All I can gather is you want to destroy the DEA, which, okay, that's a legitimate argument, but provide some actual goddamn reasoning and maybe something that might supplant it, or, you know, maybe suggest that the drug problem isn't a problem or something. But no, none of that. You know what's the worst part about this? We gotta go through 5 more points that we already went through because we didn't realize the recording stopped. So we're gonna hopefully run through this real quick because, oh my god, it's nightmare. Next point. Constitution Party is opposed to bailouts of any kind. This includes corporate and financial bailouts as a violation of the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. We do not get where they get this from. We have read the Fifth Amendment up and down, left and right, sideways, inside and out. We do not know how they get this. If you understand it, please put a comment. Please make a comment explaining where their line of thinking is going on this, because we just do not get it. Next point. The border issue is one of invasion. We're gonna have to fucking read this one for you, and oh my god, I wish we didn't have to, but it is ridiculous. Oh my god. Fuck these assholes. Whereas the invasion across our borders has been uncontrolled for decades, and whereas under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution for the United States, Congress has the power to, quote, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Clearly they don't care about point number 2. Therefore, the Constitution Party National Committee reaffirms its position on the issue of border control and calls for the U.S. government to act immediately to repel the invasion under existing immigration laws and Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution for the United States. Quote, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. You know what they don't fucking tell you about all that? First off, it's the Constitution of the United States, not the Constitution for the United States. Get it fucking right, you fucking dumbass. It's not like it was bestowed specifically for the United States. It's of the United States. It manifests the idea. It doesn't give it. It's not a gift. It's the manifestation. It's the declaration. It's not exactly the declaration, but it's the proclamation of the idea of, hey, this is our basic code of principles. It's not for, it's of. Get it fucking right. You call yourselves the Constitution Party, yet you can't even get the goddamn name of the Constitution correct. God fucking damn it. They also reject the right to migration. They don't tell you that part right away. But if you look inside their resolutions, you'll find it very quickly. These people are very, very asshole-ish. Next point. They want English to be the official language, which, spits in the very fucking face of freedom of speech. But, they have to protect constitutional rights as long as it's theirs. Everyone else can go fuck themselves. Fick them. I know it's probably not the best thing in the world, but fuck it. Use whatever language you want. But tell the Constitution Party to fuck off. Please. For me. I read through their horrible resolutions. I need something out of this. Next point. They're opposed to the national popular vote, with some really questionable justification. We'll get into that in just a minute. And are interested in preserving the Electoral College. Fine, we disagree with you, but at least that's probably your least controversial point thus far. Next thing. They're opposed to top 2 election systems. Yes, we're seeing the blatant contradiction as well. We'll explain it in a minute. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you probably already know. It opposes the top 2 election systems in states such as California and Washington, in which top 2 of the winning primaries and parties get to move on. 99% of the time, this means a Democratic and a Republican. Because, duh. And you might be wondering, okay, so how do they plan to preserve the Electoral College while still opposing the top 2 election systems? Keep in mind that there are only 2 states that have explicitly included this. They are California and Washington. However, theoretically, pretty much every state operates under this, and so does the United States. Because of a thing called Duverger's Law. And as we all know on this channel, unless you're new, Duverger's Law states that in a first-past-the-post, winner-take-all majority system, like we have here, the tendency for 2 parties and 2 candidates to surpass all others as a choice between lesser of 2 evils rises exponentially to the point where it's inevitable, which is why such systems create 2-party systems, because a lot of the people don't necessarily vote for who they want, such as myself, in fact, but rather vote because they have to choose between lesser of two evils, and voting for what you truly want could actually end up screwing you and giving you the worst evil. So, most of us do strategic voting, which is why the whole thing about trying to preserve the Electoral College, while at the same time trying to preserve the voting system in place, is blatantly a contradiction, illogical, and quite frankly, just stupid as fuck. Their justification is complete fucking garbage. They're opposed to electronic voting. Now, I will give them this, that there are some unreliabilities that could come about through electronic voting. And that, yes, unlike pen and paper, there are possibilities of fraud. Well, actually, pen and paper has a lot of possibility for fraud, too. They don't tell you that, though. But there are a lot of security and secure measures that can be put into place, and simply being more vigilant would help a fuckload. So instead of maybe opposing a system that would be much more practical for the large amount of people that exist in the United States, maybe you want to work towards promoting the idea of making more secure electronic voting systems, which would be a hell of a lot better. All right. Fucking finally! As you can tell, we enjoyed the other two. This one was by far the worst. Fuck these dicks. Fuck them hard. Fuck them with a big fucking nubby shaft. Anyway, if you made it to this point, thank you for listening, thank you for participating, and thank you for being a part of our season finale. Like we said, we're going to be taking a bit of a hiatus and a break until we get to season 3. And season 3, if we do season 3, honestly, because it's a little up in the air at this point, is going to be a lot of going back to our old episodes and doing them up a little bit better and making them look a little nicer. Anyways, like us, hate us, regardless, share us, because we're just trying to push out new ideas and all that. And those who wish not to be tread on should mind where they step. That means you, Constitution Party. Go fuck yourself. Have a great night and a pleasant tomorrow.